Someone told you something once. Maybe it was a partner, a parent, a friend. They said it so calmly, so confidently, that you didn't even flinch. You just absorbed it. And weeks later, you caught yourself repeating it. Their words, their conclusion, their version of you, as if it were your own thought. That's not weakness. That's not stupidity. That's your mind doing exactly what it was built to do. And that is precisely the problem. Here's the truth. Your mind is not primarily designed for truth. It is designed for survival, for belonging, for avoiding internal conflict. And anyone who understands those mechanics, really understands them, can walk right through the front door of your mind without you ever hearing the lock click. This isn't about evil people in dark rooms plotting against you. This is about how we're wired, about reactions you didn't choose, about a nervous system that evolved for a world that no longer exists, now running inside modern relationships with modern predators. There are two versions of a person we're going to talk about today. Version 1 is the default. It responds to manipulation instinctively, gets overwhelmed, gets confused, gets attached, and calls all of it love, or loyalty, or just how relationships work. Version 2 has seen the mechanism. It's not colder, it's not more disconnected, it is simply free. And the distance between those two versions is not therapy or years of healing, it is information. Specifically, the 8 shifts we're going to walk through right now. Look, the first one is where almost everyone gets caught, because it doesn't feel like a trap, it feels like finally being seen. Your mind runs on a reward system. You already know what that means in basic terms. You feel good when something good happens. But here's what most people miss about how that system actually works inside a relationship. The rush doesn't come from getting the reward. It comes from chasing it, from the uncertainty, from not knowing if it's coming, which means the more unpredictable, the more intense, the more overwhelming the attention, the more your mind gets hooked on it. Now take someone who, from the very first week, is texting you constantly, calling you beautiful, making you feel like the only person in the room, the only person on the planet. They remember everything you said. They mirror your values back to you. They say things like, "I've never felt this way before they even know your middle name." This is love bombing. And right now, your reward system is being absolutely flooded. Think of it like this. Under normal circumstances, someone earns your trust slowly. Shared experiences, built connection, time. Love bombing skips all of that. It overwhelms you so completely that the part of your mind responsible for critical thinking, for noticing red flags, for asking, "Wait, does this make sense?" essentially shuts off. You are operating on pure sensation. And here's the part no one tells you. This is not a choice you're making. This is an override. Research shows that the mind in early stages of overwhelming romantic attention looks almost identical to a mind in the grip of addiction. Same compulsive thought loops, same narrowing of focus, same desperate craving for more. You think you are falling in love. You are actually falling into dependency. The person doing this may not even fully understand what they're doing. Some do, and we'll get to that. But whether it's calculated or instinctive, the effect on you is the same. Your critical thinking shuts down. Red flags get filtered out. Your sense of self starts to revolve around this person because they have become the primary source of your most powerful emotional fuel. And then, slowly, or sometimes all at once, the attention pulls back. And now, you are chasing the dose. This is where version 1 gets stuck. Because once your mind has been primed on that level of intensity, ordinary reality feels gray. Ordinary connection feels insufficient. You are not missing the person. You are missing the state they put you in. But because no one taught you that distinction, you call it love. You call it need. You call it, "I can't live without them." Drop this in the comments. My brain is not the enemy. But that's just the first trap. The second one goes much deeper because it doesn't flood your system. It quietly dismantles your ability to trust what your own senses are telling you. Gaslighting. The word gets used so casually now that people have almost stopped feeling how disturbing the mechanism actually is. So let's get specific, because this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Your mind does not experience reality directly. It constructs it constantly, actively, using incoming information and stored memory and past experience. You don't just see the world, you interpret it. And that interpretation is surprisingly fragile. Here's what happens when two contradictory things exist in your mind at the same time, when what you remember conflicts with what someone is telling you. Your mind doesn't calmly search for the truth. It searches for the option that costs the least to accept, the one that creates the least pain right now. So when someone you love, someone you're already deeply attached to, someone who has become central to your sense of security, tells you that your memory is wrong, that you're too sensitive, that you imagined it, that it didn't happen that way, your mind does a calculation. And the calculation is, which is more dangerous? To believe them or to believe myself? Look, if believing yourself means accepting that this person is deliberately deceiving you, which means the relationship is unsafe, which means you have to leave, which means real pain, then your mind will choose to believe them. Not because you're weak. Because your mind is doing exactly what it evolved to do, minimizing the immediate threat, even at the cost of your long-term clarity. And this is the part no one tells you. Every time they rewrite a shared event and you accept their version, your trust in your own memory gets slightly weaker. The gaslighter isn't just changing your version of one argument. They are gradually degrading your confidence in your own perception. They are editing the operating system. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology. He wrote that the most effective control isn't physical, it's perceptual. Make a person doubt their own judgment, and they will come to you for the truth. They will ask you what is real. And every time they do, the power transfers. Here's where this leaves version 1, confused, self-questioning, increasingly dependent on the very person distorting their reality. Because if you can't trust your own memory, whose memory do you trust? Theirs, which is exactly the architecture of control. Now, the third mechanism is the one that hits you before your mind even has time to process it. And if you've ever been in a room with someone who has decided to simply not acknowledge your existence, you already know exactly what I'm describing before I say another word: the silent treatment. Most people interpret this as emotional coldness, as someone shutting down because they're hurt or overwhelmed. Here's what is actually happening to you when it's used deliberately. Human beings need connection the way they need air. Being ignored by someone you're bonded to doesn't just feel bad emotionally. It registers in the same part of you that registers physical pain, rejection, and being deliberately shut out, hurt in a literal, not just metaphorical, sense. When someone you care about removes their presence, their eye contact, their basic acknowledgement of your existence, your whole system goes into alert mode. Your stress response fires, and because you're now running in threat detection mode, the part of you responsible for rational thought and calm perspective goes offline. You become reactive. You become desperate. You start running mental loops trying to figure out what you did, what you can say, what you can fix, to make the silence stop. Every time they use silence, they are hacking your sense of safety. And they don't have to say a single word. This is what makes it so effective as a control mechanism. The person in silence doesn't have to justify anything. They don't have to argue. They don't have to defend a position. They simply remove connection, which is oxygen to you, and watch you work to earn it back. The reconciliation, when it finally comes, feels like relief so profound it registers as warmth, as love, as resolution. And your whole system associates their return with safety, which means the cycle is now encoded. If you're still here and you feel something shifting inside you, hit subscribe, because we go much deeper on this every week. Drop this in the comments. Silence is not power over me. Now, before we go further, I want you to sit with something for a moment. Everything we've covered so far, the attention flood, the eroded perception, the stress of being shut out, none of it required the other person to be consistent. None of it required them to be reliably cruel or reliably kind. In fact, consistency would have made all of it far less effective. And that brings us to the mechanism that behavioral scientists consider the most powerful conditioning tool in human psychology. Not love bombing, not gaslighting, not even silence. This one, intermittent reinforcement, the casino effect. And if you've ever asked yourself why you stayed in something that was clearly hurting you, why you kept going back, why leaving felt physically impossible even when your rational mind was screaming, this is the answer. Not weakness, not low self-worth. This. Here's how it works. Research shows that people and animals respond most compulsively not to consistent reward, but to unpredictable reward. A slot machine that sometimes pays out randomly with no pattern produces the most obsessive behavior. The person doesn't know when the reward is coming, so they never stop trying. The uncertainty itself becomes the engine of the addiction. Now translate that into a relationship. When someone is sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes deeply loving, sometimes completely withdrawn, and you cannot predict which version you will get, your craving doesn't calm down. It escalates. Because you're always in a state of anticipation, every kind gesture becomes enormous because you never knew it was coming. Every moment of connection feels precious because you cannot be sure it will return. Your mind is not experiencing love. It is experiencing a variable reward schedule, and it is responding exactly the way a gambler does, with compulsion. Here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. A relationship built on consistent warmth, mutual respect, and reliable affection produces far less intensity than one built on cycles of withdrawal and return. Stable love is quieter, which means if your sense of what love feels like was shaped in an early environment where affection had to be earned, where you never quite knew where you stood, then chaos doesn't feel like danger. It feels like home. It feels like the only version of love that registers as real. And this is the architecture that keeps people locked. Not the bad moments, the unpredictable good ones, because you are always waiting for the lever to pay out. And the worst part, sometimes it does, just enough. Just rarely enough to keep you pressing. Now let's look at how they weaponize your next reaction, because this one doesn't just trap you, it turns you against yourself. Guilt. Specifically, the weaponization of guilt as a tool. Most people experience guilt as a feeling, a sense of having done something wrong. But guilt is also a full-body experience. When you feel you've hurt someone you care about, something in you gets activated. Stress rises, clear thinking drops, and you feel compelled to fix it, to apologize, to make it right. This is actually a healthy mechanism. Guilt evolved to help us maintain bonds and correct behavior that damages them. But here's how it gets hijacked. A skilled manipulator doesn't need you to have actually done anything wrong. They just need to trigger that response. And they do this through a very specific pattern. They take your legitimate emotional reaction, your anger, your hurt, your expressed need, and they reframe it as the offense. You raise a concern, and suddenly you're the one who attacked them. You express pain, and somehow you've made them feel unsafe. You set a boundary, and now you're controlling. Look, what happens to you in that moment is precise and predictable. The accusation, especially from someone you're close to, especially delivered with emotional intensity, creates a guilt response before you've had a single rational thought about whether you're actually guilty. And because clear thinking is now partially offline, your ability to examine the accusation logically is reduced. So you do what the guilt response demands. You apologize. You backtrack. You explain yourself. You try to repair a damage you didn't cause. And here's what that does over time. Every time you apologize for a reaction that was legitimate, You are training yourself to treat your own emotional responses as dangerous. You begin to self-censor. You begin to hesitate before speaking. You begin to preemptively manage their reaction before expressing your own. The manipulator doesn't need to silence you after a certain point. You do it for them. Machiavelli wrote that the person who can make others feel responsible for their own suffering holds the most complete power. He didn't have access to brain scans, but he understood human psychology perfectly. Right, and this is the part no one tells you. The goal of guilt weaponization is not punishment. It's inversion. It's turning you into the person who is always managing, always apologizing, always repositioning yourself around their emotional state, until you can no longer locate your own, until you don't know what you actually feel, only what is safe to feel. Stop. I want you to do something for 3 seconds. Just sit with what we've covered so far. Love bombing, gaslighting, silence, unpredictable reward, and now guilt turned into a weapon against you. Notice anything? Every single one of these mechanisms has the same target. Not your actions, not your behavior, you, your perception, your memory, your emotions, your sense of what is and isn't real. That's not accidental, that's the architecture. And it gets one layer deeper. But if you think that's the deepest layer of control, wait. Because the next one introduces a third party. And when a third party enters the equation, something ancient and involuntary wakes up in you. Triangulation. The introduction of another person, real or implied, into a two-person dynamic. This is one of the oldest tools in the manipulation playbook, and it works because it activates something that has nothing to do with your rational mind and everything to do with your deepest instincts. Jealousy, real jealousy, is not just an emotion, it's a threat response. Because for your ancestors, losing a primary attachment figure to a competitor wasn't an emotional inconvenience. It was a survival crisis, social exclusion, loss of a bonded partner, being replaced. These were threats to resources, to protection, to belonging in a group. That part of you does not know it's the 21st century. It responds to the implied threat of arrival with the same urgency it would have responded to a physical threat. So when someone casually mentions how much time they've been spending with someone else, or compares you unfavorably to another person, or makes you feel replaceable, instead of stepping back and evaluating whether this relationship is worth your energy, you step forward. You compete. You try harder. You become more accommodating, more available, more eager to prove your value. Because something inside you has framed this as a survival scenario. And here is the devastating irony. You are now working to keep someone who introduced the threat in the first place. You are competing for someone who made you feel insufficient. The triangulation didn't just create jealousy, it restructured the entire dynamic. They are now the prize. You are now the one auditioning. And at no point did you consciously agree to that reframing. Something much faster than thought agreed for you. Here's what version 2 understands that version 1 doesn't. Jealousy in this context is not information about the relationship. It is a hijack. It is someone using your deepest wiring against your own best interest. And the moment you recognize the mechanism, the moment you can name what is happening inside you, the urgency drops. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to pause. Enough to ask, am I reacting to something real, or am I reacting to a spike they deliberately induced? Because that question, that single pause between stimulus and response, is the beginning of everything. We've covered 6 ways they hack your biology. But the 7th shift is the most invisible trap in the entire playbook. Picture a real conversation. It's late. You've been sitting with something that's been bothering you for days, and you finally bring it up. I just feel like you've been really distant lately. They look at you, pause, then, so you're saying I'm a bad partner? No, I didn't say that. Either you trust me or you don't. Which is it? And just like that, without you noticing it happen, you are no longer talking about what you brought up. You are now defending yourself. You are choosing between two options: agree that you trust them, or be the person who doesn't. The original concern? Gone. Buried. You never even got to finish the sentence. That is the illusion of choice. And it is the most invisible trap in the entire playbook. There is a particular kind of confusion that doesn't feel like confusion. It feels like agency. It feels like you are the one making decisions, weighing options, choosing your path. And that feeling, that sensation of being in control, is the most elegant trap in the entire architecture of manipulation. Because the options you're choosing between were never yours to begin with. They don't tell you what to do. That would be too obvious, too visible. Instead, they present you with two options, and both of them serve their agenda. You can either come with me tonight, or clearly you don't care about this relationship. You can bring this up again and start another fight, or you can just let it go. You can trust me, or you can keep acting paranoid. Look, on the surface, these sound like choices, but examine the structure. One option is framed as reasonable and acceptable. The other is framed as a personal failing, paranoia, not caring, starting conflict. You are not being given freedom. You are being given a corridor with two doors, and one of them has your character flaws written on it. And here's the thing. When you've been in a state of low-level tension and stress for long enough, your ability to think laterally, to generate options outside the ones being presented, genuinely weakens. Prolonged stress narrows your thinking. It locks you onto the most immediate available choices rather than letting you search for alternatives. A manipulator who keeps you slightly off balance, slightly uncertain, is not just making you emotionally uncomfortable, they are literally impairing your ability to think your way out. And then they hand you a menu they designed and watch you choose from it and call it your decision. Here's the truth about why this matters beyond the individual dynamic. Every institution of control in human history has operated on this principle. Machiavelli didn't invent it, he just documented it with unusual honesty. Limit the perceived options, make one option socially or emotionally costly. Watch people self-select into compliance and experience it as freedom. The sophistication of the method is precisely that it requires no force. The subject makes the choice. The subject owns the outcome, which means they cannot easily point to the moment of coercion because there was no moment. There was only a carefully designed environment in which going along was the path of least resistance. And this is where version 1 lives indefinitely, choosing between options that were pre-selected, feeling the texture of agency without its substance, slowly losing the memory of what it felt like to operate from a space that was genuinely their own. Right? So now we arrive at the only shift that matters in the long run, the one that doesn't just explain the mechanism, it dismantles it. I want to be precise about this because this part gets misrepresented constantly. Awareness is not the same as positive thinking. It is not affirmations. It is not deciding to feel better. What I am describing is something more fundamental. When you consciously identify and name what you are experiencing while it is happening, you re-engage the part of you capable of clear thought. You create distance between what you feel and what you do about it. Research backs this up. The simple act of naming an emotion reduces its grip on you. Labeling what's happening creates a fraction of space between the trigger and the reaction. And in that fraction, in that sliver of space, your ability to choose is restored. This is what the sovereign mind actually is. It is not a mind that doesn't feel. It is not cold or detached or invulnerable. It is a mind that can observe its own reactions in real time without being consumed by them. A mind that can say, while the feeling is still rising, I notice I'm feeling the pull to apologize for something I didn't do. I notice I'm feeling the urgency to compete for someone who deliberately made me feel replaceable. I notice I'm being offered two options and neither of them is actually mine. And here's the part no one tells you. You do not have to be out of the situation to begin developing this. The rewiring starts the moment you can name the mechanism. Because the mechanism only works in the dark. Gaslighting requires that you don't know your perception is being targeted. The attention trap requires that you experience the flood as love rather than as an override. Intermittent reinforcement requires that you interpret the unpredictable reward as evidence of a real connection rather than as a conditioning schedule. The illusion of choice requires that you never examine who built the room you're choosing inside. The moment you see it, really see it, with the specificity we've been talking about, the magic dissolves, not instantly, not painlessly, but irreversibly. Because you cannot unsee a mechanism. You can feel the pull and still recognize it as a pull. You can feel the guilt and still locate the manipulation inside it. You can feel the jealousy and still identify the triangulation. And every time you do that, every time you name it before you react to it, you are strengthening exactly the part of you that manipulation depends on suppressing. You are, quite literally, building the mind that cannot be owned. Look, I want to leave you with this. The people who become resistant to manipulation are not the people who stop feeling. They are the people who developed a relationship with their own inner experience that is more intimate than any manipulator could ever establish. They know their triggers. They know their patterns. They know when their sense of urgency is being deliberately spiked and toward what end. That knowledge is not a wall. It is a compass. It doesn't prevent connection. It makes genuine connection possible because you can finally tell the difference between someone who is actually seeing you and someone who is simply very skilled at making you feel seen. Version 2 is not a destination. It is a practice. It is the daily, sometimes uncomfortable choice to stay conscious inside your own experience, to be the observer of your reactions rather than the victim of them. And that practice begins not after you've healed, not after you've left, not after enough time has passed. It begins exactly here, exactly now, with what you know in this moment that you didn't know before you pressed play. That is the only real protection, and it was available to you the entire time. Drop this in the comments. I see the mechanism. I am free.